Everyone who watches Sing 2 usually walks away with the same idea. Jimmy Crystal is the villain of the story. He's the powerful producer, the intimidating boss, the guy who threatens artists and shuts people down the moment they stop being useful. And honestly, that reaction makes sense because Jimmy controls everything. He decides who gets a chance, who gets cut, and who stays visible in a world where disappearing is the same as failing. So it feels natural to point at him and say, "That's the bad guy." But here's the uncomfortable question most people never stop to ask. What if Jimmy Crystal isn't actually the villain of Sing 2? What if he's just the most visible face of something much bigger than himself? Because sometimes the characters we hate the most aren't evil at all. Sometimes they're mirrors. In Sing 2, the reason Jimmy Crystal is so easily labeled a villain is because the film shows him almost entirely through the eyes of the artists. From their perspective, he isn't a person, he's an obstacle. He's the one standing between Buster Moon and the dream he's chasing, and every interaction with him reinforces that idea. Jimmy talks down to Buster, questions his vision, and makes it clear that failure isn't an option. If the show doesn't work, people don't get a second chance. They get replaced. Jimmy doesn't just hold power, he uses it in a way that feels cold and threatening. He creates an environment where fear is the main motivator, not passion or creativity. When things don't go perfectly, his response isn't patience or guidance, it's pressure. That's why he feels dangerous. Not because he enjoys hurting people, but because he's completely indifferent to what happens to them, as long as the result meets his expectations. And that's usually where the conversation ends. Power, intimidation, zero empathy. In most stories, that combination automatically means one thing: the villain. Here's where things start to get more complicated. Being the person who stands in the hero's way doesn't automatically make someone a villain. In storytelling, there's an important difference between a villain and an antagonist, and Sing 2 quietly plays with that line. A villain is driven by cruelty, ego, or the desire to harm others. An antagonist, on the other hand, is simply the force that opposes the main character's goal. Jimmy Crystal clearly opposes Buster Moon. He challenges him, pressures him, and threatens to shut everything down if the show fails. But opposition alone isn't the same as evil. Jimmy isn't trying to destroy art for pleasure, and he isn't sabotaging anyone out of jealousy or hatred. He's enforcing rules, expectations, and consequences that already exist in his world. From that perspective, Jimmy doesn't function like a traditional villain. He functions like a wall, a cold, immovable barrier that forces the characters to either adapt or collapse. And walls don't hate the people who run into them. They just exist, doing exactly what they were built to do. To really understand Jimmy Crystal, you have to stop looking at him as a character and start looking at what he represents. Jimmy isn't just a producer with a bad attitude. He's the face of an entire industry built on scale, money, and expectations. In his world, shows aren't personal projects. They're investments. Every performance is a risk. Every decision is tied to profit. And failure isn't emotional. It's expensive. That's why Jimmy doesn't talk about passion or dreams. He talks about results. From his point of view, the artists aren't being oppressed, they're being tested. He gives them a stage, resources, and visibility, and in return he expects something that works, something that sells, something that keeps the machine running. If it doesn't, the system moves on without hesitation. And this is the part most people miss. Jimmy didn't invent these rules. He didn't wake up one day and decide that art should be cruel or that people should be disposable. He's operating inside a structure that rewards success and punishes risk. If he suddenly became kind, patient, and forgiving, the system wouldn't collapse. He would. Someone else would replace him and do the same job. Maybe with a nicer smile, but with identical expectations. That's why focusing all the anger on Jimmy is misleading. Removing him doesn't change the pressure, the fear, or the stakes. It just changes the person delivering them. Jimmy isn't the source of the problem. He's the spokesperson. The human shape given to an industry that values outcomes more than people. At this point, Jimmy starts to feel less like a villain and more like a symptom. An unavoidable consequence of a world where creativity only matters when it's profitable, and dreams are only tolerated as long as they perform. There's one more reason Jimmy Crystal feels so villainous, and it has nothing to do with his actions alone. It has to do with perspective. Sing 2 is told almost entirely through Buster Moon's point of view, and Buster is a dreamer. He's emotional, optimistic, and deeply sympathetic. The audience is invited to stand beside him, not question him. So when Jimmy shuts Buster down, doubts his vision, or threatens the show, it doesn't just feel like conflict. It feels personal. We're not judging Jimmy from a neutral distance. We're judging him through Buster's disappointment and fear. That doesn't make Jimmy worse. It just makes our reaction stronger. In a different version of this story, told from the top of the industry looking down, Jimmy might not feel like a villain at all. He might feel like a safeguard, a necessary pressure. But because we're standing with Buster, Jimmy becomes the face of everything standing in the way of the dream. Once you see Jimmy Crystal as a symptom instead of the source, a different question takes his place. If he isn't the real villain, then what is? Sing 2 isn't actually about defeating a bad guy. It's about confronting a fear that quietly controls everyone in the story. The fear of not being good enough. The fear of being replaced. The fear that if you fail once, you disappear. Every character in the film is fighting that fear in a different way. Buster is terrified that his vision won't matter. Rosita is afraid she waited too long to chase her dream. Ash is scared that she can't carry the show on her own. Even Clay Calloway is paralyzed by the fear of stepping back into the spotlight and failing again. Jimmy doesn't create these fears, he simply exposes them. That's why Jimmy feels so threatening. He doesn't shout or monologue about evil plans. He applies pressure and waits. The system does the rest. People push themselves past their limits, doubt their worth, and start believing that success is the only thing that gives them value. In that sense, Jimmy never has to destroy anyone. The fear does it for him. And that's the uncomfortable truth at the center of Sing 2. The real villain isn't a character you can arrest or remove from the story. It's a mindset. One that says your value only exists when you're winning, and the moment you stop performing, you no longer matter. By the end of Sing 2, Jimmy Crystal is removed from the picture, and on the surface, it feels like justice. The threat is gone. The pressure is lifted. The story moves on. But if Jimmy was truly the villain, then his absence should fix everything. And it doesn't. Because nothing about the world actually changes. The expectations remain, the fear remains, the system remains. That's why Jimmy Crystal was never meant to be the enemy. He was meant to be the mirror, a reflection of a world that measures worth through success and visibility, and quietly teaches people that failure makes them disposable. Jimmy doesn't break dreams with his own hands. He simply reflects the rules we already accept, often without questioning them. What makes Jimmy uncomfortable to watch isn't his cruelty, it's his familiarity. We recognize him in managers, industries, platforms, and systems that promise opportunity while demanding perfection in return. And just like in the film, removing one face never fixes the structure behind it. Sing 2 isn't asking us to celebrate Jimmy's downfall. It's asking us to notice what he represents. Because sometimes the real danger in a story isn't the character everyone points at. It's the world that keeps creating him. And that's why Jimmy Crystal isn't the villain of Sing 2. He's the reflection we'd rather look away from. If you enjoyed this breakdown and want more character deep dives like this, make sure to subscribe.